is helpful as well. So, all right, so we're going to be talking about CMA today and talking about how to do a CMA and some of those things. So as part of this though, and I apologize that I was teaching in our California offices last week. So I had Jason do the first class on Tuesday last week, and Rob always does the one he did. But I usually start out by explaining kind of the background of why I decided to get approved to do the 12-hour new agent class, and also just give you some input as to what we're doing and why we're doing it and all that kind of stuff. So I have been training for the last little over 15 years. And during that time I would always teach, like, okay, I'm going to teach the agents at the company, which I wasn't with Everest at the time, but I was teaching the agents, like, here's how you fill out the paperwork, here's how you do a CMA. And I was teaching all that stuff. Well, I had an agent that then, well, let me back up from that. Not long after I had started doing that is when the division then came out with and said, every agent that gets their license within the first 2 years, they've got to go take this 12-hour new agent course. And the idea of it was they figured it would be good to review some of the stuff that you potentially learned in real estate school. Well, so I was already teaching basically everything that we're going to go through, but the division had changed it. And so the agents would leave and go over to the board or wherever, and they would do the 12-hour new agent class. And then they would come back from the 12-hour new agent class. And I would say, so how was it? And they would say, it was everything you already had taught us. So it was kind of a waste to have to go do that, which then gave me the idea, well, I should just go get approved so that as I teach it to you guys, then you also get the 12-hour new agent credit at the same time, which is what I did. So now the reason I bring that up is because there are a few things throughout the class or the classes that I will cover that maybe I typically wouldn't have before getting approved for the 12-hour new agent. And what I mean by that is, in order for me to be a 12-hour new agent, the division has certain things that they're like, you have to teach this. And so anyway, I'll typically point those out to you as we're going pre-approved, as this is something the division wanted to make sure you guys knew. So we're going to start with, this is something the division wanted you guys to know. I typically didn't teach this way before, but it's okay. So part of what the division wants us to talk about is what is the difference between an appraisal and doing a CMA. And for those, if there's any that are new to real estate, CMA is comparative market analysis, okay? So what is the difference between a CMA and an appraisal? And you guys on Zoom, I think, let me make sure, I think I have you muted, but feel free to unmute. Although I understand we had a mute fail on Thursday. What I hear. Was it good? That was funny. Yeah, it was. So
I think you would hope the values would be similar if you're doing your CMA correctly, but the appraisal is going to have to do with the financing, right, and ensure that.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay, good.
No licensed appraiser.
Okay, good. So the appraiser is going to be licensed, and they're licensed to go and do those things versus we're licensed as realtors, but not as appraisers. So, okay, good. What else? What else would be the difference between a CMA versus an appraisal?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess just the summation of it. CMA doesn't really have a value per se other than the expectation of your realtor, but the appraisal is where you're going to get all your actual value. I guess that ties into what we just said. Then.
Okay, good. Yeah. How about on Zoom? What do you, anybody got anything?
I was going to say the same thing.
Same thing. Okay. Okay, so here's what I would say. Well, actually, let me ask another question first. Which one is more accurate, a CMA or the appraisal?
Appraisal.
Oh, that's too high.
CMA that's already provided by Century 20.
Different value, and then
I was reading about it. I just didn't understand. Like I read it like, why do I need to use this? I already have the.
You got the
MLS.
Jay-Z, I'm going to mute you because I'm assuming you're not talking to us. All right, I have everyone muted, so feel free to unmute if you want to answer, but that way we don't have any mute fails again. But so which one is more accurate? So the response that I got is they're both an opinion. Okay, which I would agree, perfect with that they both are an opinion. What other thoughts? Anybody on Zoom? What thoughts do you guys have in terms of which one's more accurate, an appraisal or CMA?
I would say they could both be accurate,
Good question, and there isn't
but
one.
we can't use ours as an official appraisal.
Okay, good. I like that answer of like they're both.
I'm gonna say the appraisal.
Say that again.
I'm gonna say the appraisal.
You're gonna say the why. So Mariano, why would you say that? You're muted if you're talking. Or I guess you don't want to answer that.
I don't know if it's more accurate. It's the one that matters.
Okay, good. So okay, good. Now,
That's a
so
better answer.
well, here's the thing. So here's what I would say is, and
It's more accurate though.
what's that?
Not at
What
all.
did you say?
Yeah. that's-
Well, I think we're talking.
So here's what I would say is it kind of just depends, but here's the point of it, of talking about this is the division wants to make sure you understand that there is a difference. But here's the thing, in the public side, so I kind of have asked you what's the difference, but as far as the public is concerned, which one is more accurate?
CMA.
As far as the public's concerned, they totally go, well, an appraiser did it, therefore it's got to be the most accurate. So now let me give you a quick story on that. I had a neighbor of mine that called me up one day and said, hey, my mom has passed away. I'm in charge of her estate. Can you help me in getting her property sold? And I said, yeah, sure. So I went and met him at the property. Now, this property was just over off of Atherton Drive there in Taylorsville and kind of by the Four Lakes Golf Course, if you guys are familiar where that is. But so I go over there and I meet him. Well, where this house is a builder had gone through and just built basically one street of new homes in there. And when his mom had her house built, though, she was older already and just said, I don't really want a basement because I'm not going to go downstairs anyway. So they just build it slab on grade. So there's no basement. Well, I go out there to look at the property and I look at it. And as you guys could imagine, doing a CMA on a property without a basement, there are not a lot of other comparable properties, especially because this home was built early 2000s. So, I mean, it's newer. So there's no basement on it. And most of the homes built since 2000 generally are having basements. So as a result, I'm trying to do my CMA on it. And I'm struggling with coming up with a value because I'm like, there's nothing to compare it to. So I kind of just had to do some extrapolation to kind of just do as best as I could. I landed on a number. The number I landed on, it was, if I remember right, somewhere around like 185 is what I said I thought the home would be worth. So I call up my neighbor and I say, hey, I've done some research on it, but man, this is a tough one because without the basement, finding other homes that are the same year built and da. And he says, okay, so what'd you come up with? And I said, I'm thinking probably somewhere around 185. And he goes, oh, well, I had Kelton, who was a neighbor who lives down the street from us, who is an appraiser. He said, I paid him to do an appraisal. And he came back and said that it was worth 217,000 or 15, somewhere in there, 215,000. And I said, okay, well, I'm gonna have to take a look at the appraisal because I don't know how he came up with that. Which, by the way, part of how I did that is part of what I did is when I can't find a comparable like that, a lot of times what I will do is say, okay, if somebody was wanting to buy and they had kind of, if you're in the ballpark, I could say kind of they want to spend about this much money on it, on the property, or it's not the property, on a property, what could they get for their money? Because at the end of the day, that's what really determines value, is a buyer is going to buy whatever they feel like is the best value for the money they're spending. So I kind of just did a search to see if somebody had in the $200,000 range, what are they gonna get? And that's kind of how I landed on this 185. Well, so I call up Kelton, who's the neighbor. I probably shouldn't use his name. Now you guys will get an appraisal and it'll be Kelton and you'll be like, oh,
you're the
you.
guy.
So anyway, I call him up and I say, hey, would you send me a copy of the appraisal on that? And he says, well, I can't really because, this wasn't paid for by you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, all right. So I call up the other neighbor. Will you call him and tell him to give me a copy? So he calls and tells him. So I get a copy of the appraisal. I look through the appraisal and now keep in mind, this home is over here in Taylorsville. I looked through the appraisal and 2 of the comparables that he used were in Sandy. And I'm like, yeah, that was exact. I'm like, you can't, I called him up and I said, hey, so why are you using comparables in Sandy? And he goes, well, finding homes that are that year built without a basement is not easy to do. And I said, well, I get that, but like, you can't use it. What the value of a house in Sandy is not going to be the same as there. And I don't feel like you adjusted for it. And anyway, the other thing is appraisers don't like agents telling them, which he didn't like. But anyway, so I said, okay, so of course, what price would you guess the seller wanted to list the home at? Yeah, the 217 or whatever. So we listed it then. And some time goes by and we're getting no offers, no showing. So we reduce the price, Finally, we get down into, and I want to say it ended up selling for like 190, somewhere in that range. And I wanted to call up my appraisal. Well, actually I did. I called up and said, I said, hey, FYI, it didn't sell for that. And of course, guess what his response was? They should have got a better agent, is what he said. And so here's the thing. As far as the public's concerned, an appraisal is always going to be accurate. Here's the thing. Now, there are going to be times when they're right and we're wrong and we're right and they're wrong. Like, just know that that's true. But I just always kind of feel like we do a better job of valuing a property because think of it this way, is the appraisers they don't look so much at what's going on today on a property. They're always looking at what? Yeah. So with that in mind, let's kind of run through and talk about some of this. So if I've got a house here, an appraiser is going to come out and do the appraisal. What are the things they're going to take into consideration? Well, the first thing is what we just talked about, is it has to have been done within the last, or sold. The properties that they're going to compare to have to have been sold within the last 6 months. Now, their preference is to use more like 90 days. They want it to be that, but an appraiser is not going to have to justify or write down why they did what they did if it's within 6 months. What other things are they typically looking for that they wouldn't have to then, same with this, justify? Well, one of them we already just talked about. Going from Taylorsville to Sandy is not okay. They're going to have to justify why they did that. So what kind of, how far away from this property are they typically looking?
It just depends too. If you're on the west side or the east side, it's like you're right in the middle of I-15, some on the west, some on the east, like you're gonna get a big difference.
Okay, good.
So
Yeah, good point.
it just really depends on where you're looking at. I just sold one in Copperton. The appraiser, which I'm so grateful he did, he pulled comp from West Jordan, which is kind of its own little niche. And I highly disagreed with what he did, even though it was
to your benefit.
Yeah, so I didn't say anything, but yeah, it's just, I think it has to be pretty close, especially these days. There's so many sold, so.
Yeah, good. So typically what they're trying to do is stay within a 1 mile radius. Okay. Now, again, like I say, there's exceptions to all of this stuff because of, like you say, depending on where it's at and what's neighboring and all those kinds of things. But so typically within a 1 mile radius, what else are they looking for? The same style, obviously. They want the same style of house.
The same year.
Yep, good. Year built. Square footage.
Garage.
Okay, good.
Lot size.
And then I'll just say acreage. Good. So typically that's like, we could continue to go down the road of bedrooms, baths, all that kind of stuff. But as a general rule, this is kind of where you're starting with. So the same thing applies for us as we're doing a CMA is, even though what I said is I feel like we are a little more accurate because we kind of know what's going on, meaning in an appraiser's mind, they kind of know what's happened over the last 3 to 6 months. And they're just assuming that's what's still going on, versus with us, we can kind of get a pulse of like what we're seeing in terms of how many offers are people currently getting, and we're hearing things from within the office. So from my standpoint, I always like to argue that I feel like we do a little bit better of job of knowing the values of where they're at. But the bank, the appraisal is necessary for the loan. Because again, just think about it, if you were loaning money out on a property, you want to know, hey, if it goes bad, I want to be able to get my money back. That's what they're doing, which who was it? I had somebody ask me recently.
Well, look at the Tidewater on the one that we did at 905. When they submitted the Tidewater, and the reason the government actually does a Tidewater notification, because they're not 100% sure that the appraiser is accurate in what they're doing, which they reach out to the agents involved to get better data. So there are programs that realize, they need us looking at the current state of the market.
Yeah.
It's really relevant.
Yeah, good. And so, yeah, as you said that, thank you. That reminds me. So last week I mentioned to you guys, I was in California at our offices training down there. And one of the agents down there asked a question about the appraisal stuff. And she said, I just bought a house. This is in California. She said, we had to pay, I don't remember what she said, $130,000 above list price in order to get it accepted. And she said, and then the appraisal gets done, and the appraisal came in exactly what our purchase price was. And she was kind of asking me like, how is that possible? How is it that we offer $130,000 above list price, and then it just happens to appraise for exactly $130,000 above list price? So what's the answer to that?
Market status. Right?
Okay.
What somebody would pay for it.
Good. So what she was asking though, sorry, I didn't ask that question, Bert. What she was asking is, how does the appraiser, like, is it coincidence that it appraised exactly for that?
Influencers.
And so just know the appraisers know the value they're trying to hit. And so even though it may sound like I'm trashing on them a bit, ultimately they kind of are in a lot of ways really our friend too, meaning because they do get, here's what we needed to appraise for, and then they'll do their best typically to try to get it to hit that value. And the other thing to just keep in mind, so that you know as you're dealing with clients, is it is not uncommon also for it to appraise for either right at the contract price or really close to it, meaning a couple thousand or 5,000 above. And the reason that typically happens, again, is go back to what's the purpose of the appraisal. It's for the loan, the mortgage company to know, the lender, knowing that, is it worth at least this amount of money? And as long as it is, then you're going to be good. So just kind of recognize that's the purpose of it. It's not to get a true, like, what is this home worth? And because at the end of the day, the only way you know that is to put it on the market and to find out. So good on that. All right, so good. So now here's the thing. The other thing that I wanted to hit on real quick, and then we're going to jump in and I'm going to show you guys, we're going to do a CMA on a property. But the other thing I wanted to hit on really quick is we have to start with appraising or coming up with a value, not appraising, our CMA of coming up with a price based on the similar to how an appraisal is going to do it. And we want to do that because we're going to have to at some point probably deal with what's that appraiser looking at. And we want to be able to know and influence some comparables if we can. But we're going to start with that. But the other reason I say I think we do a better job is, does a buyer typically go say, I want to buy a home in this 1 mile radius? Like when you guys have had buyers, do you only stick within this 1 mile? No. Instead, they kind of say, I want to be in West Jordan or wherever. They give you kind of areas that they want to be in. And so keep in mind, that's the other thing of what we're doing when we're doing a CMA, is what we're trying to come up with is ultimately is what is really a buyer going to be willing to pay for this home. And so we are going to want to consider more than just this. but that's where we're gonna start. Okay, so now, with that in mind, we put the screen down here. We're gonna jump into and show you how to do a CMA. Now, the way that I'm gonna do this is, for you guys on Zoom, I'm gonna share the screen so you can see what I'm doing. But do we have, and I haven't looked to see who all is online right now. Do we have some from St. George on here on Zoom right now? Take that as a no. All right. So I don't care, whatever this guy's on. Let's get this screen on first. But, okay, so what we're gonna do here, the reason I asked if there was anyone from St. George is their MLS is gonna look different than ours, but the process is still the same, is all I was wanting them to see. So I'm gonna just walk you through the process of how I do it. Now, here's the thing. We got Rick sitting here, and if we had any other agents or managers within the company here in this training, or if they were up here training how to do a CMA, we're gonna all have slight variations of how we do it. So just know that that was one of the biggest struggles for me when I first started in real estate, was I wanted doing a CMA to be a science. I wanted it to just be, you plug in the information, it spits it out, and that's the answer. But what I've learned is it's more of an art than it is a science. So as an art, it's kind of like I may do it this way and end up with a value. Rick might do it a different way. Another manager might do it another different way, but we all should come to about the same general area. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind, that somebody else may have shown you how to do it, and you might be like, well, they didn't do it that way. Like, just know we're gonna all have our own little flair of how we do things. And to some extent, part of that too, where that comes from, is because it is really an art, not a science, is you need to be doing a lot of CMAs. And so my recommendation is for newer agents is you should be doing a CMA on a property every week until you feel comfortable with doing CMAs. Because to some extent, as I go through and do this, I sometimes might even do it a little different this time than I did the last time, a different property, just because of that, like gut feel is kind of, well, in this area, and actually Alex even brought up, like if it was close to I-15, or even using like a 13th East or a 7th East, something like that, you might sometimes go, okay, well, on this one, I'm not going to go that a mile away, because once you cross this barrier, then prices aren't the same anymore. So you have to stay. So just kind of know there's those pieces that play in. All right. So here's the process that I go through when I'm doing a CMA. The first thing that I'm going to do is for me, we're going to assume we just got a phone call from a seller that said, hey, I want to sell my house. Come out and talk to me about selling. So for me, the first step that I like to do, and again, this is just a personal preference thing, so probably most don't do this. I don't know. I guess you can tell me if you do this or not. But the first thing I do as soon as I get an appointment with somebody is finish my prospecting. All right. That's the first, because that's what you guys do too, right? As soon as you set an appointment, you make sure you finish prospecting. You don't just go, oh, okay, now let me go do this. All right. So when I'm done with my prospecting, I'm going to go on and first thing I like to do is I like to go look at the history of the property, just so that I can know what's kind of going on. So here's what I would do then is, so for me, I'm going to clear out the status here. And then what I like to do, the way I like to do it, let me see what it's. Oh, so hey, for you guys on Zoom, make sure you put your license number in there if you have. It looks like most have, but okay. So typically the way I do it is I'm going to come down here and I just put in the house number. So this property that we're going to look at today is the first home that I ever bought, and I had it built. And so we're going to take a look at it. So we're just going to assume that we've gotten an appointment to go talk to this seller. And so I go in and I plug in the house number of the property. You can see it's brought up 61 matches. So from there, I typically am going to probably try to narrow that down a little bit. So I'll come here and say, okay, let's make sure we see Salt Lake County. Well, that brought it down to 32. So I could continue. I could put in a city, or I could put in a zip code or whatever. But for me, even seeing 32 matches, I'm like, for what I want to do right now, that's fine. So I'm just going to hit view results. here's every property that has a house number of 5651. So I just then scroll down until I find the first one that shows the address. So this is it, 5651 West Walnut View Circle. Now, I'm going to click on it. Now, if I continue to scroll down, you'll see here's another one. There's probably another one here. It doesn't really matter which one you get. So just grab one of them, okay? So the first one I see, I'm just going to click on it. And it'll bring up the property here so that I can see it. And then if you click right here where it shows history, that's what I'm really wanting to see. So that's why I don't care which one I click on, is it's going to bring up the whole history at that point. And then from there, I just like to look back and just kind of get a feel for what's gone on with the property. So you can see on this one, so I bought it in like 1994 or 93, something like that. And then we sold it in 2000. So you can see that it went on the market in August of 2000, and then in September it hadn't sold, so I reduced the price from 139.9 to 139, which I don't know why. Like, I seriously look at that and go, why in the heck did I do that? Because I'm like, that was the stupidest price reduction ever. But apparently it wasn't, because if you notice, 2 days later, the property sold. So apparently it was a good idea. But when I look at that every time I teach this class, I'm like, I don't know why I did like a $900. But apparently it worked, because then it sold, okay? So I sold it and moved in 2000. 2008, they tried to sell it for 231. And then what was going on in 2008, 2009? So you can see they reduced the price from 231 to 195. Then a month later went from 195 to 159. They took it off the market. It expired. I think it must have got foreclosed on. Came back on in 2011, and then it sold here. So I am going to click on this one to look at the most recent one. Okay. So here's the most recent time that this property was on the MLS. So then it sold for 125 in 2012 cash. Okay. So what we're going to assume then for this is, let's assume that in 2012, well, it doesn't matter, who cares when, but let's just assume that the person who owns the property now bought it and they've gone in and done a rehab on it. Okay, so we're just going to assume that it's been rehab, but if not, or whatever, I typically am going to click on this to pull up and look at the photos. We'll do it quickly. And I just want to get a feel for what did it look like, which, by the way, this is not what it looked like when I always have to preface it that way. But in fact, we had carpet here, which I wish I wouldn't have done. They changed it and put in tile here, but these colors and stuff were not mine. I had carpet there. They tore it out and put linoleum. But that carpet I did put in. But so anyway, I typically am just going to go through to look at pictures to get a feel for what does it look like. Okay, now we're going to assume, though, for the sake of doing this CMA, let's assume that the seller told us that since they bought it, and it doesn't matter when, but since they bought it, that let's assume they put in a brand new kitchen, they've got all new flooring, it's got new carpet, like they've gone through and updated. Okay, so we're going to assume it's been updated. But for me, once I get this, that most recent one, I usually will print this off. So I printed this off before we started today, so that I would have it. So the reason I print it off is just so that I have it to reference to. And a lot of times I'll even take this with me when I go out and look at the property, so that I can just see has anything changed? Meaning, like, did they add an extra bedroom? They tore a wall down, like, you know, just whatever they did. Okay. All right. So now we've got that. So now we're going to come back here to the MLS here. So I'm going to clear the criteria so that I make sure that I don't have anything else in there. Now, we're going to start with doing this similar to how an appraiser would do it. Meaning, I'm going to let's go with the 1 mile radius. We're going to use the same style, about the same year built, all of that information. Okay. So I'm going to say, I want to see sold and style. Is that this that we're hearing?
I think so.
Let me see who's unmuted. Sorry, Jay-Z, I'm gonna mute you again. We're hearing background noise. All right. So on this one is a tri-level, multi-level. Now on that, let me explain. I haven't seen this so much lately, But this is back to, again, of it's an art, not a science, is what I have learned, although like I say, I'm not seeing it so much lately, but it used to be years ago that an agent would list a property that was a tri-level, multi-level as a 2-story, because their thinking was people are more interested in a 2-story than a multi-level, and so they'll put it as a 2-story so that more people will see it. I haven't seen that too much lately of that happening. So maybe it's kind of gone away. But the reason I bring that up is I usually start with the exact whatever the style of the home is. And if we struggled now in finding some comparables, the next thing I would do is go say, well, let's throw in some 2-stories. And then I would go through and look to see, did agents list some 2-stories that were really multi-levels as a 2-story? So I'm probably not going to use a 2-story, but that would be another way of trying to find more comparables. Okay? All right. Next thing that I'm going to do is the sold date's gone back a year from here, and I don't want to see that. So I'm going to just start with 90 days. And again, on this is something that sometimes I might start with 120 days. Like depending on the area, if I know the area doesn't have a lot of turnover, I might go 120 days. If I know there's a ton going on, or there's been a lot of changes in the market in the last month or two, then I may shrink that a little. But as a general rule, I just kind of start with 90 days. So you can see so far we're down to 950, but we haven't yet put in the, our distance. So I'm going to do view map. So it's brought up the map. And then if you click on this radius tool right here, you can set the radius. And I'm going to start it, and I'm just going to say 1 mile from, and then just as an FYI, you can put in an MLS number right there instead of an address too. So a lot of times I'll print off this too, just so I don't have to retype the whole address. So I hit set criteria. So now you can see it's zoomed in, and within the 1 mile radius of that property, now we're down to 15 properties. But we still need to add more information in there. So I usually will come down here and get to year build. So the year build on this one was 93. So what should I put as a range in here? How far each way do you feel like I should go? And there's not a right answer. I mean, there's somewhat of a right answer, but there's not really a right answer.
1990 to 95.
Okay, so good. So here's how I typically do it. For me, is the newer the property, the tighter the range. The older the property, the bigger the range. Is kind of how I would do it. Okay, so for me, I'm good with. For me personally, on this one, I probably would do 1990 to 1999. I might potentially even go like a 1987 or something, like just because, like I say, the older the property, the bigger the range I will go. If it was built in 2020, then I might only go a couple years, I might do 2018. It's like but the older the property gets, the bigger of a range that I will do. Okay. All right. So now you can see that brought it down to 13 there. So now let's do our square footage. So this one is 1808 was the square footage. What do you think on a range for the square footage on this?
1,600 to 2,000.
1,600 to 2,000 sounds good. Now, so here's how I again will do this though. Is I'm going to put in 1999 on the square footage. Now, the reason for that is and again, this is back to it's an art, not a science. There's nothing wrong with if you put in 2000. For me, though, I usually don't put in 2000 because my thinking is somebody that wants a home with at least 2,000 square feet probably won't consider it an 1,800 square foot home. Now, I'm not, again, might not be necessarily true, but that's just my logic is what I'm looking at it is kind of going, okay, somebody who says they want at least 2,000 square feet probably isn't going to consider it. So my preference would be to not have anything above 2,000 or above. So I'm going to just throw it in at 1999. If I'm struggling finding comparables, like if it makes too big of a difference, which it doesn't look like it did, then I might change my mind and say, okay, we'll put in 2,000 as well. All right. All right. Let's see. The only other thing I probably would do is garage capacity. So I'm going to say a minimum of a 2-car garage. And the acreage on this one was 0.19. So I'm probably just going to say 0.15 to 0.25. And that's brought us down to 8. So what I'm trying to do in this is, as I'm putting it together, is I want to end up with somewhere around 3-4 comparables. Okay, so if I come up with 8, that's probably good enough to where we could then narrow it down. Because the other thing we're going to consider next, which we're not going to spend a ton of time on this, but the next thing I would then consider is the condition of these houses. And there's one other thing too that that I would look at, although I feel like it's not as much of a deal breaker anymore as it used to be in this area, at least. And I'll show you. So we've got those 8 properties. So I'm going to select them all, and I'm going to go to the agent full report here. And what I'm going to do now is I just want to look through to make sure that they are the same kind of a style. So meaning like this one here is a multi-level, but it's a little bit different of a floor plan, but not enough to make that much of a difference. The one thing that I used to feel like was a really big deal, but since have not noticed it as much, which is interesting on this one. This has no bedrooms and no baths. Wow. I don't understand that. Okay, so our subject property that we were looking at only had 3, or it had 3 bedrooms up and only 1 bath. So is there a difference? Do you think in the buyer's mind, one with like this one here has 2 bedrooms upstairs and 1 bath versus a 3-bedroom, 1 bath? What do you guys think? Yes, no, indifferent?
There's an adjustment.
So here's what I would say. I have used, every time I teach this class, I use this same property. And so here's what I've observed over time. In this area, at least, when I first started using this property, which now, so remember, like I sold it in 2000. So I sold it almost 21 years ago, or I guess right around now, 21 years ago. For the last 15 years, I've still been using this property, which every time I do this, I'm like, I should have never sold it. Right? Especially today. But anyway, or I should have gone back and bought it when that guy got it for 125. So, but here's what I noticed is initially, if a property if it had only 2 bedrooms versus the 3, there was a pretty big difference in the price. If it had 2 bathrooms upstairs, meaning it had a master bath versus only 1 bathroom upstairs, there was a pretty big difference. What I've observed over the last few years as I've done it is almost there's like no difference. So in this area, I would say it's really not, my point in that is I'm fine with keeping a comparable in this area, at least that has only 2 bedrooms up versus the 3, because it just doesn't seem like price-wise it's made that much of a difference anymore. Used to, but for whatever reason, doesn't seem to anymore. But we'll see. Maybe today we'll notice something different. So let's kind of just see what happens. The next thing that I would do is I always go through and look at the pictures, because remember, we're going to assume our subject property has totally been updated. Okay, so you guys tell me, so let's say our subject property on a scale of 1 to 10 is like a 9. Okay, so let's look at some of these and kind of see, would we want to keep this as a comparable? What do you guys think?
It's well kept, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they've kept it good, but when you look at the kitchen, I'm kind of like, yeah, they added some handles to the, so it's kind of updated, I guess, I don't know. The floors look decent, and yeah, it's definitely a well-kept property, so keep it or no? I mean, at this point, we don't have anything else to compare it to, so I'd say that, let's keep it for now, okay? So then we're gonna come down to the next one. And I'm gonna see, okay, this one here, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, about the same type of a property there. A little bit less square footage, but all right, let's see what it. Looks like updated countertop, but not cabinets. So again, looks pretty decent. So here's the interesting thing. One time when I did this, I went through and every property that had not been updated had sold. All the ones that had been updated, had updated kitchen and stuff, were not selling. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. There was this one moment in time where I would have said, in our scenario, what we just did now, where we've updated it, that it would have been like, that was a bad idea. Typically not, but, so anyway, we'll see what happens here. All right, so this one here, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. And for me, it's usually, I just want to kind of get a feel for what it looks like, but I always want to see the kitchen and the bathrooms as far as deciding update. So again, just looks like they just painted those cabinets. So this is interesting. So just as I noticed, as I'm scrolling through, so what has been going on in the market, meaning in terms of you list it and then it sells how much above list price? A lot, I mean, you know, 20, 30, whatever. Look at this one here though. Listed at 475 and then sold for 453. So that's kind of my point of like, we have a better feel a lot of times to what's going on before an appraiser would, but all right, so this one's a 3 bedroom, 1 bath, so similar. All these are looking pretty well kept, so it's good. So this one here, 405, 2 bedroom, 1 bath, that's interesting. Not updated. So this is more of like what I would say I was kind of picturing, probably more like what we would think ours was, so 435. 445. This one's a 3 bedroom, 2 bath, so this one has the master bath upstairs. Which, like I say, years ago, that would have been sold for a lot more than the ones with only 1 bath, but you can see it's kind of just in that same price still. All right. So here's the question for you. We've looked at those 8 properties. What we would want to do is decide on 3 or 4, I mean, you could have 5, whatever, but we would want to figure out of these, which ones we wanted to use as comparables. So I probably would remove, was it this one that wasn't updated at all? Or was it this one? Yeah. Was it this one? Yeah. So I would say, all right, let's get rid of that one. But the rest of these, like, I kind of feel like they're all, we're okay. So, okay, so here's the question for you guys so far. Based on what we've seen, let me just show you again. So this one sold for 411 in 411 in October, 423 in September, 448 in September, 450 in September, 453 in August, 435 in August, 445 in August. So what, okay, so here's the question. Based on this information, and the way I would do this is I would identify 3 or 4 of these, I would print them off, and then when I sit down with the seller, I'm gonna go through and just point out, here's why this house is better than yours, or here's why yours is better than this house. Either way, kind of just pointing out the differences, okay? But based on what we've seen so far, what price would you say our subject property would probably sell? Or what would be your recommended list price?
What was the price of the one that sold in October? Very top.
I think that was it, the top or the bottom. For some reason I was thinking it was down here. Nope. Was it the top one?
I think it was.
Yeah. So 411, let's look at the pictures on this. It didn't show any beds or baths. Not really, I mean, it's okay. Ooh.
Course. David's got a hot tub sold.
Oh, there you go. All right. So this one's the most recent sale. What do you guys think? We got them from 411 up to 450 something. Where do you-
439,
Say that again?
439.
439, okay. Anyone else? Nobody wants to say.
I think closer to the lower side here,
Okay, so what do you think, Troy?
415, 420.
415, 420, okay. What about the rest of you? Give me a price.
430.
430, okay.
Disagree. I think it should be like 440 to 445.
Okay,
I'd say 435.
okay. Okay, give me a price.
37.
437, okay. You should have been like, price, this is the price is right, $1. Yeah. How about you guys on Zoom? I only heard one person on Zoom. Either throw it in the chat box or unmute and share me a price. What are you thinking?
Maybe like 420.
420?
was thinking like 425.
425, okay. So, okay, so good. Now, here's the question for you. But this is great. This is how an appraiser does it, and then they're gonna go in and make all the adjustments and yada, 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 okay? But what do we not know still?
We're assuming that it's completely updated.
Okay, yeah, so, but as far as meaning, when we're pricing the property, yeah, we're gonna assume it's updated, but as far as, let's say we do know, let's say we know it is. What do we still not know though? Based off of the MLS, what do we not know? Okay, okay, good. So to some extent, that's gonna influence it, as what does the seller want, okay?
In this scenario, what are we competing against?
Okay, good. That's where, that's more where I was going. So we know this is we know the past,
Yeah.
but what we don't know is, so what, that's great. That's what, based on the past, we kind of have an idea of price. And to some extent, if we're gonna do it based on that, I would almost say we ought to be more, I mean, this one is kind of throwing us maybe a little, but to some extent, I would say just based on this information and looking at what property it's most comparable to, I would kind of say, yeah, it probably ought to be somewhere in the 440 or 450 range, right?
Right.
But
That's what I think.
that's what you think?
440s.
Okay, well, let's find out. So now, so here's what I do. So I would have printed off a few of those, the ones that I felt like were the best comparables for the seller, printed them off, okay? But the next thing that I want to look at is I want to see what properties are currently in backup or under contract. So in using all the same criteria, there's two. So now let's see if this changes your mind any of what you would price it for, okay? So now this one here, were they the same address? Oh, no, these are neighbors though. Okay, so this one here is at 450, was listed October 7th, or yeah, and went under contract, looks like just yesterday. So yesterday, so let's see what happened here. So it looks like new carpet there. Updated. So looks pretty good. Okay, so that one is at 450. It's got the master bath, but like I say, I'm not sure that that makes a ton of difference anymore, although I would still say it's gonna make some. And then we got this one here at 425.
Less square footage finished in the basement, was it? We're gonna miss that.
I don't know, okay. Is that missing? Oh, it looks like they had a deck on
They
it.
had- It's covered.
The inside definitely looks better than what I thought it was gonna look like from the outside, but. Okay, so now with this, we've got two that are under contract. So I would have printed both these out as well to show this one here was at 450. Let's look, on these, I do kind of like to look at the history on it, because okay, that makes sense. See how this one was listed, when they took it off the market, they put it back on the market, went under contract, then it failed, then it went back under contract again. So, because I was looking at that thinking, why did it take a month and they haven't done anything price to get it under contract, but I can see why it didn't. And then same with this one, I'm just always curious, so listed September 30th, went under contract a couple weeks later. So, okay. All right, so now based on that, does that change your opinion? Now what do you feel like the value would be? 450, okay. Zoom, unmute and share what you guys think. You guys in here,
450.
450, okay. You guys still feel the same?
445, I'd go up quite a bit than what it was.
445, okay. What about the rest of you?
I'd go 450 with pricing strategy.
Okay. Okay. All right, but what do we still not know?
What it sold for.
Well, yeah, we don't know what it sold for, but what else do I not know? Like,
What's active, what's listed?
there you go, that's what I meant.
That's it.
So now the next thing that I need to look at, because here's the thing, here's the key piece for me. If we click on active and all of a sudden the number of matches went up to 20,
Oh,
all of a sudden now my price would go, okay, we got to go back down.
that's it.
But if it comes up as 0 or 1 or 2, then I'm probably still in that same ballpark. But we want to see where they're at too. So I would have printed off those 2 that were under contract. And now I'm going to hit active. Let's come over here. There's nothing.
Nothing. Wow.
So similar properties, there's none for sale. So does that change your opinion at all? Now, what do you think?
Strengthens it.
Doesn't that make the value higher?
Yes, it should. So does that change anybody? Does anybody want to change their value up higher based on that? Or are you still sticking with, I mean, it sounds like 450 is kind of where most of these.
450 is where I would stick, again, with the pricing strategy and what the market's doing.
When you say pricing strategy, what do you mean by that?
So if it's on the market more than a week or 2, and you have no showings, no offers.
Well, let's do this.
Okay,
Let's
yeah,
just,
finish it.
yeah, let's finish. No, and then what I'll do is I'll put the screen up and I'll write it down for you guys so you can see.
Yeah.
So, so here's what for me, the fact that there's none active. Now, remember what I said though. Remember earlier I said to you guys, the way that a buyer buys is not the way that a appraiser is going to do this, which so far we've just been doing this the way an appraiser would. See, for me, I kind of, when I get none like this, or even to some extent, even if I had some, I may still do a variation of what I'm going to do. But what I want to do is I'm going to go back to the map here. Because remember, a buyer doesn't necessarily just say they want to buy in this little area right here. So I'm going to delete that search criteria. And I'm going to back up here just a little bit on this. And I'm going to say, let's just kind of draw this maybe like something like this to Bangor Highway here. And I don't know how far south we are there, but I just want to see if I do that, does that bring any matches?
Still nothing.
And there's still none.
Wow. It's a pretty good position to be in.
Yeah, so it's a great spot to be in. So, but what I was hoping is that by doing that, maybe I would see it 1 or 2 at least, and then we could see what they were priced at and say, okay, we're going to be competing against this. And so let's see what we can come up with. So that's kind of interesting that even within that area, I'm going to do it even just a little bigger just to kind of see. So let's just kind of go.
Russ, I've got to head over to a meeting. Just want to see you over there.
So still nothing. And it's not like we have, I'm trying to just think, did I put anything else in here that? When I'm getting nothing, a lot of times I want to look at my criteria that I put in. The only thing potentially, and this shouldn't matter, but is that 90 days back. Let me take that out and see if that does anything. So I just typically then want to look at this criteria to make sure I don't have anything screwy or weird in there, and I don't. So, okay. So based on that, then I probably would say, I kind of agree. I would say probably somewhere in that 450 range is probably where I would want to price it as well. But now, so let's go to, so I'm going to stop the screen share. I'm going to put the screen back up here. And let's talk about the pricing strategy real quick, and then we'll wrap up so we can get over to some. But here's the key thing, especially with, for me, I'm a little bit unsure where our market's headed. And what I mean by that, I'll give you what my opinion is of what I think is going to happen, but I'm not convinced that 100% this is what's going to happen, but I kind of feel like, especially based on what we just saw there are no comparables, there are no properties for sale that were like that, which just supply and demand economics tells you what's got to happen. Yeah, the price has got to go higher. Now, the challenge that I have with that though is my personal belief is come spring, we're going to see another run up on our prices is what I think is going to happen. And the reason being is we're still short on inventory. And as long as that's the case, we're going to kind of see that happening. I kind of feel like what we're going to see take place though is that the number of sales that happen in the Wasatch Front is going to go down as the prices are still going up. So I think we're not going to see as many homes selling just because you're getting people that can't afford to do it. Okay. So, but here's the key. So if I were to go in right now and listing that property, so if you guys were my seller, what I would want to do is be approaching it and saying, okay, here's what we looked at. Here's the solds. Here's what was under contract. And there is nothing for sale that's even somewhat close to yours within, like, I don't know how many miles that really we went. We probably went 4 miles from that property. Well, at least 3 in each direction we went from that property. And there's